I'm deeply delighted and very well honored to be able to introduce the dynamic keynote speaker for this symposium today. Our speaker, Dr. Tia McNair, is an associate professor and vice president in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Student Success at the Association of American Colleges and Universities. She collaborates with all of the association's program offices to take a leading role in advancing the association's projects and meeting on student success. She is a co-principal investigator on a newly funded LEAP project, advancing underdeserved student success through faculty intentionality in program-centered learning. Dr. McNair also directs the association's developing a community college roadmap project, and she's also a PI on a new LEAP project, advancing roadmaps for community college leadership to improve student learning and success. She's also a co-author on a publication assessing underserved students' engagement in high-impact practices. Dr. McNair chairs the association's Equity Working Group that is part of the General Education Map and Markers. She also is a co-PI on a collaborative project with Excellence in Education to advance Latino student success through the implementation of scaling of high-impact practices to improve student learning. Prior to joining the Association of American Colleges and Universities, Dr. McNair served as an assistant director of the National College Access Network in Washington, D.C. Her previous experience also includes serving as a social scientist and assistant program director in the Directorate for Education and Human Resources at the National Science Foundation. And she is the director of the University Relations at the University of Charleston in Charleston, West Virginia. She served as a statewide coordinator for the Educational Talent Search Project at the West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission and the intern associate director of admissions and recruitment services at West Virginia State University. And she has served as an adjunct professor at a number of institutions. In 2009 and 2010, Dr. McNair served and was selected as a fellow to participate in the Association for the Study of Higher Education's Institute on Equity and Critical Policy Analysis. She has held leadership positions within the regional, and statewide TRIO associations, and she is a board member and state president. Dr. McNair earned the bachelor's degree in political science and English at James Madison University, and she also earned the MA in English from Radford University and a doctorate in higher education administration from George Washington University. She is an awesome human being. She is quite busy. I believe this is her fifth stop within the last month at institutions like these. We are honored and delighted to have Dr. Tia McNair this morning. Would you join me in a hearty welcome for this dynamic researcher educator, and scholar. Dr. McNair.
Thank you. I did. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. I don't stand behind the podium, so I like to walk and talk, so I hope that's okay. And I like people to raise questions while I'm presenting. But I just want to say thank you to your president, Dr. Dunning, and to his wife, the First Lady. Thank you for inviting me here today. I love coming to the South. It's the only place where you can get sweet tea. They don't serve sweet tea in D.C. That's right, they don't. But it is exciting to be here, and thank you to your leaders, your academic leaders who invited me, and Dr. Rinsford for coming out to the airport to pick me up when I missed my connecting flight in Atlanta. And I just want to say thank you so much. Your hospitality is just wonderful. It's always interesting when people do their bios and they read that. Isn't it amazing what I can accomplish and I'm only 25? Who laughed the loudest at that? I wanted to. I think I heard it from over here. But it's exciting to be here to support the work that you're doing. How many students are in the room right now? How many students are in the room? Okay, that's great, because I'm going to show you some things that are coming from our work at AAC&U so that you can see how it fits to prepare yourselves for success. One of the things that I get to do in my role as an Associate Vice President is work with campuses and academic and staff leaders all across the country at multiple institutions. And actually, this is my 5th stop in 2 weeks. So I have been on the road for quite a while, all the way from Albany, New York, to Davis and Elkins in West Virginia, to now here. So I work with institutional types all across the country, and this is some of the most exciting work that we do because we talk about academic success and what is going to set you up for life. For you to think about, how is my academic pathway preparing me for success? How, when I get out into the workforce and I engage into our democratic society, how am I being prepared for that success? What specifically can I point to that I can show employers that has been vital to help me prepare? And then also it is, how are we preparing you to deal with the unscripted and complex settings that you don't even know exist right now? How many of you know, I'm talking to the students for a second, that you are actually going to be in at least 7 to 10 jobs in the next 20 years? Do you know that? You're going to move from job to job to job. So we're preparing you for success. And we're giving you the foundation for what that means. So as we're going through this, I want you to think about these 2 questions. How can we help you as students integrate and apply your knowledge to deal with unscripted problems in complex settings? How are we doing that? And how does it all tie together to prepare you or lay the foundation for that success? For the faculty and the staff who are in the room, I want you to think about that specifically for what you're doing to contribute to that student success pathway. And then I want you to start thinking about, how can we do what we do well and do it better? That's what I do when I work with faculty across the country. I focus on how are we doing things well and what we can do to increase student success achievement. So for those of you who don't know, how many of you have ever heard of the Association of American Colleges and Universities? Just by show of hands. Okay, just a few of you in the room. So AAC&U, we're in our centennial year. We were founded in 1915. We are the leading national association concerned with undergraduate quality. You hear a lot in the media and in the news about the completion agenda. How many of you have heard about the completion agenda? We have to have more students complete. Well, our focus is not just on completion, it is on completion and quality and what that actually means for your success. If you complete a degree and you get your certificate, but you cannot write, you cannot speak well, you cannot do critical thinking, engage in quantitative reasoning, engage in problem solving, then that degree is an empty promise, because we know those are key foundations for your success. And we want to help institutions better prepare students by making sure that they are doing assessments of those and giving you feedback on that work. We are meeting ground for over 30,000 faculty and staff members across the country. And much of the work that we're talking about, it comes from the ground up. It's not us telling institutions what they need to do. It's us working with faculty to improve the educational quality at their institutions. So this is our mission. Our mission is to make undergraduate liberal education the heart and the focus of the work we do, and inclusive excellence. We just recently changed our mission. One of our presidents from Butler, he was at Butler before, but he just passed away. He was on our board, and he encouraged us to make sure that we said inclusive excellence was at the heart of what we do. And the question is, what do we mean by inclusive excellence? Just by a show of hands, because I need this to be interactive, and I want you to ask me questions and to be engaged. How many of you, if somebody came up to you and said, I believe in making excellence inclusive for all students, how many of you would say you agree with that? Only a few of you? Most of you? But what does that mean? What does that mean when we talk about inclusive excellence? It means really being held accountable for the work we're doing, to actively engage in reflection with students and with our colleagues, and defining in measurable terms what we mean by success. We focus at AAC&U on what we call the Liberal Education and America's Promise. It's our signature initiative. It focuses on preparing students for success in the 21st century and on learning outcomes. You have learning outcomes at your institution. Your faculty, the faculty have spent a significant amount of time engaging in the development of learning outcomes. The question is how are those learning outcomes intentionally tied to every single practice that you're engaging in? And how do you know that you're meeting those learning outcomes? If I ask the students in this room right now, can you tell me your institutional learning outcomes? How many of you can respond that the answer to that is yes? How many of you do you know the institutional learning outcomes and the why behind your education? That is one of the things that we talk about, the intentionality of the learning outcomes. And the reason why we talk about that is because they are tied to your success. AAC&U, we do an employer survey every couple of years. We released the latest one at the beginning of this year, at the beginning of our centennial. We don't tell the employers about essential learning outcomes. We don't tell them about liberal education and America's promise. What we do tell them is, you tell us the skills and the competencies that you want to see in your employees. And then you tell us how well do you think they're being prepared for success at your company. Oftentimes, when we talk about the essential learning outcomes, and these are some of the categories, and campuses across the country have adopted them in various ways, these are some of the things that they're telling us. Here are some of the lists of the essential learning outcomes. And again, many of the campuses have adopted their own learning outcomes. When you're in your courses, when you're talking to your faculty members, you should say, how is this assignment? How is this work? How is this undergraduate research connected to the learning outcomes that you have defined that I need to have in order to be successful? How is that happening? Well, one of the ways we do it, like I said, is we have an employer survey. The one that was released, the Falling Short, is about college learning and career success. It was released in January of this year. If you look at this, it was an online survey of 400 executives. We did something a little different. We also did a survey of students. You're going to see, and I'm only going to be able to show you a snapshot of the results because we have limited time this morning. You're going to see what the employers say about student preparation for the workforce versus what the students say in relationship to what they need to be successful. I want you to think about whether or not that is true for you. Do you feel the same way about the preparation that you're receiving? So right here, let's look at this one. The learning outcomes that at least 4 in 5 employers rate as very important. And you'll see on the side, that's what students say as they rate as very important. So here's from the employers, and here's from the information from the students. Any comments on that? You're going to have to talk to me, or we're going to have a very long conversation for 45 minutes, because I'm not used to having a completely silent audience. So do you see anything that might be different or aligned to what it is that you're doing? Because here are some of the things. In oral communication, working effectively with others and teams, written communication, ethical judgment. We don't tell the employers, here are the learning outcomes. We just say, what are the skills and the competencies? So when you're thinking about being employable, you're thinking about participating and having a full life and having lifelong success, how do you represent your capacity or your proficiency in these particular areas? What about these? Analyzing and solving complex problems. Being innovative and creative. Staying current on technologies. Something should strike some people in this audience about this research. Are you surprised by anything? Exactly. The students have found certain things more important than the employers, especially analyzing and solving problems with people from different backgrounds. Why do you think that is? Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Yes. Why do you think that is? Yes. Please. Please. Mm-hmm. Exactly, exactly. And if you're thinking about who we're surveying, C-level suite executives may be more homogeneous these days than the students who are coming through the academic pipeline, if you don't think about it. And they value more being able to understand and engage with people from diverse backgrounds. Yes? Mm-hmm. Exactly, exactly. Great insight, great insight. So what we do with these is that we try to connect with students when we show them the employer research survey, and we work with faculty and staff across the country, is it gives a sense of relevance. If I had to ask the students in this room, if I asked you, what is one of the main reasons you are in college? What are you going to tell me? What was that? To make money. What else? To get a degree. What else? To get a job, right? What else? To have an impact on others. Expand networks. To grow personally. To become a problem solver. That's right. So when we are giving you assignments and we're designing what we call high impact experiences for you and practices, our role is to incorporate the quality of those elements into those assignments, because we do know that we have to explain the relevancy. I actually work with students all across the country when we do focus groups, and they come in and they tell us, this is why we're here, and this is what we want to do. And we want our faculty members and our staff members to actually tell us more of the why. Why am I doing this, and how does this process connect to my success? The good thing about the Undergraduate Symposium that you're in today, that has been clearly explained. You are the leaders when it comes to doing undergraduate research at your institutions. But the question is, how do you connect the other experiences across, because our focus is on developing the whole student with multiple high-impact practices, not just undergraduate research, but undergraduate research is very important to that. So we also asked them about applied learning. We asked the employers to tell us about the value of applied learning projects and why that is important. They want you to do this. They want you to actually engage with doing an applied learning project at your institution. And the good thing is that you're doing that. But how then are you going to translate that into all of the things that you just told me of the why that you're here? When you're going and you're sitting down with an employer or you're sitting down with a community organization that you want to help, how then are you going to translate that? How many of you have what we call at AAC&U and nationally electronic portfolios of the students? How many of you have electronic portfolios? One person. Two of you. What is an electronic portfolio? What's an electronic portfolio? No, exactly. You're telling exactly right. So electronic portfolios are used by campuses all across the country to help document student learning, to help engage in student learning. You can take videos of yourself. Today, you might want to consider having one of your friends take video of you presenting your work, and you can post it on an electronic portfolio. You can put your work assignments in there. You can put in your reflections from your faculty members, your resume, your video, all of those things that are going to help set you up for success. When we're hiring at AAC&U in a national organization, in my last round of hiring for our entry-level staff, I asked these graduates, and I thought this was going to distinguish them, I said, please send me the link to your electronic portfolio. We had 3 finalists. How many of those 3 finalists do you think had an electronic portfolio? How many? 1? None? All 3 of them did. All 3 of them had an electronic portfolio where I was able to go in and look at their research that they've engaged in. I was able to go in and look what their faculty members said. I was able to go in and look at what they said about their writing assignments. I didn't have to ask for a writing assignment. I didn't have to see them, ask them whether or not they were effective communicators. I was able to know. I am trying to tell you that the competition is changing. It is changing in the world. A resume alone is not going to suffice. You have to start thinking about how you're integrating and applying your knowledge across, because that's what faculty are encouraging you to do. The faculty members that you're working with are encouraging you to do that, but employers are asking for that too. And being able to integrate and apply your knowledge also contributes to your democratic engagement and to your engagement with the world around you, because you see things from multiple disciplines. You see things from multiple vantage points. And that ability will distinguish you and set you up for success. And what I want you to think about is, how do you share that story? How do you talk with others about your educational experience? It is not going to distinguish you to go in and say, oh, I participated in an Undergraduate Research Symposium. Let me tell you, I work with over 1,300 campuses across the country. It happens everywhere. It doesn't distinguish you. Distinguishes you on how you relate that story to make it real. How do you make it real for the people who you're thinking about for graduate school and you're thinking about for the next step? So at AAC&U, we talk about what we call the high-impact practices. These practices are based on research that we know from working with the National Survey of Student Engagement on what sets up students for success in active and engaged learning. So if you had to look at this list, do many of these happen on your campuses? How do you have access to them? How do you find out about them? Email? You apply to some of them? How else do you find out about them? Your professors tell you about them? That's good. What we know about these practices, and I'm going to show you a snippet of research from one of our publications, is that if students participate in multiple of these practices, they report higher learning gains than students who do not. It gives them a leg up. And the question is, when we work with the faculty, and I'll be doing this afternoon, it's about the quality of those practices and the elements of those practices that make them successful, not just by doing them. We've worked with many institutions that have had learning communities, but they were not successful because they're not high impact. You can have an educational activity, for example, like undergraduate research or service learning or diversity and global experiences, but they may not be high impact. High impact has a level of intentionality to it. It is tied to your achievement of learning outcomes. It has those definitions that are key to your success. It's transparency of the assessment measures that your faculty members work with you on. And it's just like this. The high impact practices, for a high impact practice to be a high impact practice, it is defined to learning outcomes. What are the learning outcomes from participating in undergraduate research? Okay, how to do research. What else do you learn from high impact practices? From research, okay, yes. From undergraduate research, how to present, so you have oral communication. What else? Writing, yes. What else do you learn from undergraduate research? What learning outcomes are associated to undergraduate research? Excuse me? Analyzing results. What else? Critical thinking, yes. What else? Working with others, good. What else? Problem solving, yes. So of those things, of the learning outcomes that you just defined, how then do you illustrate your proficiency in those things? Right, you have a presentation. Right, and what do you do with that presentation? You give a presentation, but how do you illustrate that you're proficient in it? Mm-hmm. Exactly. What's the evidence of that, though? You present today, and then what happens after that to document that you are proficient in that? This is what I'm getting you. This is what I want you to think about. It's not merely, if you want to stand apart, from all the others who can list participation on your resume, what is the evidence and the feedback that you're going to get today that you can actually document to show that you are proficient in that particular area, in oral communication? It is something to think about as you go through participating in these types of activities, not just today, but going forward. Because I can tell you that employers want to know the evidence. The transcripts don't work anymore. You know why transcripts don't work? Thank you. Transcripts don't work. We spend, and when we're working with employers and we're talking with them, they tell us how many seconds do they spend looking at a resume and a transcript? Most resumes get about 10 seconds, under 10 seconds. It's like this as we're going through. You have to figure out how you're going to stand out and how you're going to utilize your learning to be successful. So we talk about the intentionality of HIPs and them being defined with the evidence. And then for campuses, and this is more for the faculty, disaggregating the data of who's participating and who's not, and who has access and who doesn't have access. Those are critical areas for campuses to look at, because it can't just be the students who are the most motivated. If we're going to talk about student success, it has to be a collective action, especially for the educators who are in this audience. We are thinking about how we focus on integrating high-impact practices across the curriculum and creating what we call guided learning pathways for student success. And I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes. So, we have devised with George Koo at the National, he works for NILOA now, but he's the one who worked with us on defining the research on high impact practices, some of the quality elements on what makes a practice high impact besides being tied to learning outcomes. If you had to think about your undergraduate research experience and think about the elements that made it an engaged learning experience, do any of these resonate with you? Yes? And there's a reason why they resonate, because these are going above and beyond. These activities, experiences with diversity, frequent, timely, and constructive feedback, your public demonstration of competence. That's why we're here today, is to think about your public demonstration of competence, to show your knowledge. That's what makes a practice high impact. So we work with campuses to ask this question. How then do you engage with research on high impact practices? To examine the effects, to create inquiry-based models so that you can continue to analyze and be better and to spread the wealth of high impact practices and to improve the quality of those high impact practices. So this is from a national survey from NESE a couple years ago. They've actually changed some of the elements on the survey from 2012 on. So this is before they did that. And I'm going to show you some of the effects that we had from a national sample from institutions in Wisconsin, California, and Oregon. They were our 3 original LEAP states. And before I do that, I just want to say, if you haven't had a chance, I was speaking at the National Urban League meeting on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. There were leaders all across the country, many from HBCUs, and we were having the conversation about the recently released Gallup survey that talked about students, particularly students of color, and their experiences in college. And it talked to them, it was referencing how they felt prepared and supported by their faculty at HBCUs versus how they felt students of color at predominantly white institutions. Does anybody want to take a guess how the results came out from the Gallup survey of thousands and thousands of students of color? Anybody want to take a guess? I love you. You're the only one. You might as well come up front because you're the only one who's really talking to me. Might as well just come up. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
I think HBCU students feel like they had a more interpersonal experience with their professors as opposed to those at PWIs who believe that they felt like PWI students were kind of on their own.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of the key results. I think it was really astonishing. I think it was up between 60 and 70% difference from in the 20s and 30% difference. And I think that HBCUs and leaders of HBCUs need to investigate and go deeper into this survey, but I do think it sends a message about the quality of education and what's happening at our historically black colleges and universities. And the report just came out, and the meeting at the National Urban League, the Higher Education Summit, brought together, again, thought leaders all across the country to talk about what are the practices and the strategies that are going to help support student success and advancing student learning. And we had these conversations, and one of them is coming up with high-impact practices that are effective, that are done well, and that support student success. So we asked this question in this publication, looking at those 3 states that I mentioned. We asked specifically who participates, and what are the effects of participation in specific experiences, and what are the effects of participation in multiple activities. The interesting thing is that when you're looking at a national survey, I can't do the analysis that your institution can do because we can't particularly say which of the high impact practices are the tipping point for each institution. I would gather to say that at Albany State University, undergraduate research is one of them. But undergraduate research combined with what? Is it service learning? Is it writing intensive courses? Is it diversity and global experiences? I can't tell that from the data. But I can tell you that students who participate in multiple high-impact practices, when you disaggregate the data, report higher learning gains. This is what we call indirect assessment. So here are the areas that we're looking at. The HIPS examined. There were 6 different high-impact practices examined with this version of the National Survey of Student Engagement. We're looking at learning community, service learning, study abroad, internship, capstones, and student and faculty research. Again, the limitation of the data that I have is that I can't tell you the combination at these particular institutions, because we're looking at it at the aggregate, the specific high-impact practices that were effective. But your institutional research officers, if you engage in the National Survey of Student Engagement, can do that type of analysis. Yes? That's a good question. That's an excellent question. And we work with campus teams right now to try to define the high-impact practices that happen in the co-curricular experience. Because if you look at the list of high-impact practices, let's just go back to that for a second. If you look at this list, a lot of these activities that we call high-impact practices, where do they happen? Are they all within the classroom? No, they don't. They happen outside of the classroom. So when we talk about intentionality of design, we are encouraging our campuses and working with our campuses through our institutes and through our works to develop that collaborative partnership with academic and student affairs, so that students who are participating in student activities and engaging in high-impact practices outside of the classroom are getting the same level of feedback and engagement on how the participation in those activities are connected to their achievement and demonstrated proficiency of the learning outcomes that the institution has set up as your definition of success. You would think that saying that is easy, but developing those types of partnerships are sometimes more difficult at institutions than you think. But it is a collaboration between curricular and co-curricular experiences, because you want to be able to show the integration of both. So when we look at some of the data from this sample that we got from NESE, we're looking at these on 4 different scales. And again, the scales have changed over the past 2 years at NESE. But we're looking at these 4 areas when students are talking about deep learning, gains in general education, gains in practical competence, and gains in personal and social development. A lot of the things that we've been talking about this morning. So those are 2 of the questions that we started with the data set. So on average, students who, from this particular sample, who participated in high-impact practices, you're looking at the ones who participated in high-impact practices, they reported an average boost of these particular points. Those who said they participated in a learning community, those who said they participated in a service learning, in study abroad, in internship, and student-faculty research, and capstone. An average boost over across of these outcomes that we've just talked about, looking at them in the aggregate. So there is a correlation between student participation in these particular activities and a higher self-reported learning gain. Are you surprised that study abroad is so low? No, why are you not surprised by study abroad? Right. Study abroad, even though we talk about global learning and study abroad and those particular aspects, for most students, it is a high-impact practice that they may not have access to. So, for example, I was working with a campus just this past week at Davis and Elkins. It was a group of campuses, small liberal arts colleges, and they are trying to design ways that make it so that all students have the opportunity to participate in study abroad. They're redefining their student fee structure. They are talking about developing a more equitable way of supporting students for success. The University of Southern California, George Sanchez, has developed a model for this. It's one of our, if you go on our website at aacnu.org, you can see what they're doing at USC. They have taken students who normally would not participate in study abroad to Japan for multiple years, and those students would not have had the opportunity to do that without them changing their institutional fee structure to support that work. Here's effective participation in multiple HIPs. Again, I can't tell you from the aggregate, because these are so many institutions coming together, but you can find out which areas are the tipping points for improving student learning outcomes at your institution. Look what happens when students participate in 5 to 6 high-impact practices. The difference in their self-reported learning gains. Do you think this is true for your campus? So where's the evidence? I'm always going to come back to that. I'm always going to come back to that. You may be doing it, but where's the evidence that you have learning gains from participating in these high-impact practices? So then we ask this question: what is the effect of participation in multiple HIPs relative to students in the same group, students who look just like you? We looked at first generation and transfer students in this sample. Anything surprise you? So we're looking at first generation and transfer students and their participation in multiple HIPs. It does increase each time. Exactly. And the question is, again, is this true for your campus? Is this true for your participation? Are your learning gains increasing and improving as you participate in high-impact practices? And of course, I'm going to ask this: what is the what? What's the evidence? How do we know? Because if you think about tying all this together, we talk about high-impact practices, we talk about undergraduate research, we talk about service learning, we talk about writing intensive courses, we talk about study abroad. We learn from our employers that the skills and competencies associated with your participation in those particular areas are correlated with what they want from their employees. But how do you articulate that? How do you share that knowledge? How do you show them your levels of proficiency? Look at this for African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanics, and whites. Well, we don't have HBCUs in Wisconsin and Oregon, but we're looking at more Hispanic serving institutions. Because we're looking at, it's not a mixture of, no, we don't have HBCUs in this particular pool, because we're looking at, Wisconsin, Oregon, and California. And in California, we're looking at more HSIs in this. But we do have a population of students at African Americans. That's a great question, and somebody asked that too when I was at another historically black college or university, is that what does this look like for historically black colleges and universities? How then are they rated when you aggregate the data? And we do need somebody to do that research. We don't have it. Right, and that's the thing, we can't attribute. This is why we're creating an inquiry-based model, is that we're giving this, many campuses that we've worked with, we put out the publication and said that you can disaggregate and cut your data this particular way. I'm directing a project now, a new project that says Committing to Equity and Inclusive Excellence, and I'm working with 16 institutions across the country, 3 of them being historically black colleges and universities. That's Morgan State, Clark Atlanta, and North Carolina A&T. And they are interrogating their data and looking at high-impact practices just in a way that we're talking about now. We just had a big equity summit. We called it an Equity Academy, where we raised these questions and asked them to examine their equity gaps in relationship to high-impact practices. That project just started. We are in a 2-year process for that. They are developing what we call campus action plans, where they are talking about their institutional capacity to do this type of data analysis, but then what happens after that, and what type of interventions do they put in place. We're going, and I hope that you follow that project as we go through, because I think it's going to help, because we have various institutional types. We have community colleges, we have HBCUs, we have Hispanic serving institutions, just so that we can take the deeper dive into this strategy for analyzing high impact practices. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, because we just did it as a model. So, for example, Clark Atlanta is in this project with us. They're doing a deep dive into their institutional data to see how it would be different. What we did, because when we work with campuses, most of them don't understand this model. They don't understand how you really need to think about the intentionality of high-impact practices. Most campuses, when we show the list of high-impact practices, they check off that they're doing those high-impact practices. but they don't check off about the relationship to students achieving the learning outcomes and the quality of those high-impact practices. There's an intentionality by design that needs to be incorporated into the use of high-impact practices. So that question is one of the reasons why we got funding for this other project, is to take a deeper dive into how would it look different. But most campuses can do this type of analysis and connect it to student learning and success. So most campuses, just so you know, so you understand how the structure, most campuses have what they call an institutional research office that collects the type of data that we're talking about. And what we're saying is that campuses across the country can do this type of analysis to improve and advance student learning at their institution. We do this all the time. We work with campuses all the time in order to help them do this type of work that we're talking about. That's one of the reasons why we're doing the project that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. And campuses across the country are doing that. We work with 200 campuses every summer to do similar type of work. So when students tell us, what does it mean to be engaged in learning? Here are some quotes from the focus group. I just want you to look at this. Does this sound familiar to you when you talk about your engagement? Look at the one right here. This one student is the one in the middle. This one student is talking about what does it mean to be engaged in my learning and to make it relevant. He was telling us he would apply it to like our daily lives. Like he would use like TV shows or use radio or something else that like we actually listen to instead of just like, and here's Aristotle and blah, blah, blah. Like all these old people that are already dead and that like none of us knew or know anything about. So first of all, I just want to say, for those of you who use like all the time, let's put a moratorium on the use of the word like. Stop doing it, please. But also, the question here is that the students who participated in our focus groups on what it means to be engaged with learning told us that the most effective learning activities are when the faculty members were able to connect it to real-world problems and put in applications to their knowledge and made something that was relevant to them. For the students in the room, is that true? You feel mostly engaged in learning? So when those things happen, that's what we do with faculty across the country. And here's another one. They talk about the positive environment for engaging in learning. And when they could engage and collaborate as a whole. That's what we mean by engaging with high-impact practices. So here are some of the questions that's mostly for faculty and mostly for staff about what does it mean for high-impact practices. Who's participating? Who's not? How is it tied to your institutional mission and vision? How is it tied to your strategic plan for student success? How is it tied to the guided learning pathways? These are all critical areas for you to think about with the why. Why are you engaging in these particular activities? When we talk about, and I'm running out of time, so I just want to do this. I want to go back to this real quick. The intentionality of undergraduate research. And what does that mean for you? It engages with transparency, engages with tied to learning outcomes. But it also has these quality elements here. I work a lot with the Council for Undergraduate Research. I'm actually going to keynote their meeting, their annual meeting in June, and talk about the connection between undergraduate research and student success. There is definitely a defined connection with that. And there are quality elements on what makes it effective. And some of our leaders from across the country have defined some of those elements, just like we talk about the quality elements of a high-impact practice. When you're engaging in undergraduate research, you should be looking for these elements. Your faculty members and your staff members and those who support your work should be incorporating these particular elements to make it successful for you. Because we've learned from research that they're at the core of what happens and what supports your success. But we define certain performance descriptors. And I'm just going to say this really quickly. How many of you, when you do talk about, you said at the beginning, critical thinking, oral communication, those particular things that what are critical for your success. Do you know how those are defined? And what does it mean to be proficient or to gain competency in what it means to be critical thinkers? Or oral communication. What ASCNU, we have what we call the value rubrics. And they're downloadable. They're for free. Any of you can go online and get them and print out a rubric to say, this is what it means as a level 4 to be proficient. This is what it means as a level 3 or level 2 or level 1. And the interesting thing, when the president of the Gallup survey, when he said on Tuesday, when he released the findings on students of color, and he was talking about critical thinking, he actually said at that meeting, we don't know what critical thinking means. That's not true. We do know how to define it. And faculty across the country have been defining it and encouraging students to achieve that from across the board. They've developed. We have the performance descriptors right here. So you have to think about, how can I translate what I'm doing into the skills and competencies that I know that are going to set me up for success, and how can I show my achievement of those? If you don't do anything else, I highly recommend that you download the value rubrics just for your own development. For your own development, download them. Look at what it means to be at a level 4. And then put your assignments and your feedback from your faculty members up against those performance descriptors. And then tie that into your evidence for success. I want to just go back to, I'm sorry, that's for the faculty this afternoon. These questions before I end. How are institutions preparing you for life, work, and citizenship? How are you integrating and applying your knowledge? If you can answer these questions, not just in global terms, in specific terms, you are preparing yourself for success. We are preparing you for success. And those are the things that I'm hoping that you're going to get out of your experience today. I hope you're going to get out of your experiences going forward. Think about it. Have somebody videotape you today while you're doing your oral presentation. You do not want to lose that opportunity when you're doing your oral presentation to be able to put that in an electronic portfolio, to be able to share that with an employer, to be able to share that with somebody who's making a decision about that scholarship in graduate school. Take that opportunity. Gather the evidence that will help you be successful. So I thank you for the opportunity of coming here today, and I just wish you the very best in your academic careers. And for the faculty, we're going to be working more this afternoon on helping define those quality elements and what that actually means and how do you tie that to success. So thank you very much and enjoy your day.
We are indeed blessed to have had you come here and talk about the high impact practices, and particularly tying that to student outcomes. And remember that question, where is the evidence? So we are delighted. So let me acknowledge again and thank our President and First Lady for being here, Dr. Rinsford. Thank you. We could not do the things we do without the excellence and leadership that we have at this great institution. So again, we thank you, thank you, thank you.